Well, Jessica, Shanna, it's like such a pleasure to reconnect with you and to connect even for the first time, sort of face to face in this way. And thank you
Mhm.
so much for agreeing to be part of the exhibition and for taking on the challenge of making a new work for the show.
Well, thanks for trusting us to do that.
Yeah.
It's like far and few between that someone will just say, do what you want. And we never even met, so I just want to say thank you for like trusting us to be able to do that.
Yeah, it really meant a lot. We rarely get like carte blanche like that to just create however we want. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
The pleasure is truly all mine, and I feel like it was really easy. Honestly, it wasn't, there wasn't any real moment from the, proposal to decision. It was just like, great,
Awesome.
Sometimes you just know, you gotta trust your instincts. So the first set of questions I had for Jessica, um, so I would really love to know more about how you came to find mural art. It's a form that takes up space, it commands attention, and I would like to know more about your early recollections or experiences that led you to dedicate such a major aspect of your practice to this truly powerful form.
Yeah. So being the daughter of two Colombian immigrants in San Francisco, I really felt like growing up, I only had the option to either become a doctor or a lawyer. I was like their American dream child. Even my older brother was born there also. So I was kind of like, you have to make it kid kind of thing. I went to college pre-med at UC San Diego, and I quickly started to realize that the world, because of my multiple identities, that I would like walk my path differently than other folks next to me, just because of who I am. And I started to become politicized, and very quickly kind of changed my major to political science so that I could. My little brain was like, I'm gonna figure out like all the laws so that I can figure out how to change them. I wanted to become the president of the U.S. That's what I wanted to do. So I graduated in 2009, and that was when there was a big recession here in the U.S. and nobody was hiring like fresh college grads with like liberal arts degrees. So at the time, I remember seeing either in a magazine or a book, Banksy and Shepard Fairey, they had put these like very simple 1 to 2 color stencils out in the world that weren't, they weren't very good, but they conveyed a very political message like very quickly for the viewer to see. And I instantly just was like thrilled by that. Like it was illegal. It was like, they just, I just loved it. So I went to Home Depot, I bought 3 cans of spray paint, and I just had my little stencil for about a year or two. I was just like really excited to spray. I can't even tell you like what it meant or why I did this like little figure, but I did that for about a year. And then I would say the first like 4 years of my career were just really developing the methodology of like, okay, how do I make something look more photorealistic? How do I add a texture? How do I, just perfecting like how to use a spray can really. And then, at the end of the day, I was still kind of making art in a basement, and like the social practice aspect of it was really missing. And I remember murals were, they're kind of like coming onto the scene at the time, and artists like were going big and in different cities and stuff. And I just remember being so terrified, because nobody that looked like me or talked like me was out there, doing this kind of thing. It was just men really, like painting like naked women but like really big and amazing. And so I remember my family was traveling back to Colombia, they're traveling back home. And I thought, okay, I could like, what better place to kind of try than there. And at least if I fail, like I'll be away from like, out of America. No one will like know what I did, and it's okay. So I remember seeing this kind of method where you print the mural to scale, you spray tack it on, so kind of like a temporary paste, you X-Acto knife out like a letter, and then you take the letter off and then you spray it, and so on and so forth. And I tried it there in Bogota in 2013, and it worked. And the first one was like a 50-foot by 9-foot thing, so I was just like, whoa, like if I can do this here, I can do this anywhere, And same thing, the next couple of years were just about like figuring out the proper methodology of of how do I take something that I designed that's this big and blow it up, you know, on like 50 to 80-foot scales, and, you know, figuring out like, you know, instead of 1 or 2 colors, how do I get 5 colors? How do I get more people in it? How do I, you know, just how do I do this thing? And I would say the last 4 years have really turned into developing like my messaging and what is it that needs to be said? What is it that I want to say? Yeah, I'm really gotten into just like how to disrupt and how to document through these like big visual like advertisements, you know, because oftentimes they're created, you know, not for people like us. They're created to, you know, try to get us to buy something or to target us, you know, for something. So to kind of combat that with like these large visual messages. Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing story. I mean, it's an amazing sort of path, because it would seem that you're an autodidact. Like you went from pre-med and poli-sci to becoming, you know, sort of a really vital, you know, artist working on the mural scale, and figuring it out, you know, just figuring out by trial and error, and I would imagine slowly you sort of came into a community as well that kind of helped you sort of find your voice and your approach, your methodology. Would that be fair to, I don't know, surmise?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I feel like it's like in my bones and my blood to just hustle and get it done and to figure it out, even though there's no one to be like, this is how you do this. This is how you hold a spray can. This is the tip you use to get this line. Just from watching my dad like navigate America and like get it done and like have a healthy, successful family, I feel like you just figure out ways to learn, you know, even though no one's there to teach you to do it. And I feel like you know, there are people out there in the world, you know, there's these men that have been out there doing things, but I really feel like it's you know, they say like, it's your inability to become your like heroes that lands you within your own like stratosphere of like your own genre, right? So I feel like, yeah, it's my inability to become these like men where I'm like creating my own sort of thing. And then it's like, okay, who else is sort of creating their own thing? You know, it kind of like causes me to, you know, really look upon my peers to see like, oh, okay, these people are creating kind of like screen prints that look kind of visually similar. I'll draw from that. Okay, going to Cuba a couple times and seeing, you know, how the government uses poster art to like distribute messages and, you know, that kind of thing. And it looks kind of like, it's not quite graffiti, but, you know, they had like these government sponsored murals and things like that. So just really drawing inspiration from like a lot of like my peers, I feel like has been what has taught me, you know. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It does make sense too that, you know, having been politicized at the time, you know, that you were, and then looking for an interesting vehicle through which to transmit messages. I mean, it all kind of, you know, it's a beautifully poetic way of exercising, right, your dream of being, you know, in a really powerful position to be able to, you know, share a vision and tell stories. The other thing that I thought is really interesting in your story is that you have such a strong aesthetic, you know, and that doesn't seem to come from someone who had to really learn how to draw. It seems like it's coming from someone who always drew or always had, you know, that kind of ability, which is something that some of us would take years, you know, to really get to, you know, to that kind of level of, well, virtuosity. That just happen?
I always, as a kid, looked up to my older brother, and he would be like, hey, Jess, draw this for me, draw this for me, draw this for me. When I was very young, like 10 or 11, he would take me to this place called Tower Records, and he would buy me like graffiti and hip hop magazines. And so I remember spending summers, he would be like, copy this graffiti. So I would like spend it like doing the letters over and over and over again. But it wasn't encouraged, you know, it wasn't encouraged as an active way to like live a successful life. And, you know, oh, you're such a great artist. Like, I can't wait for you to be this grand artist when you grow up, you know. It was like, okay, now, like, let's study, you know. So I never took it seriously until after college. I was able to move away, and then finally, you know, it was like, actually, what do I want to do, you know? And even then, it wasn't like I'm going to be this grand artist. It was just like, this is what I'm called to do, and like these are the images that I'm like very passionate about. You know, I remember making an image about the Egyptian revolution back in 2011 when I think they like overtook their president, and they had all these like protests. And so I made an image about that, and that like all of a sudden, I think like Twitter was like just coming out. I still don't have a Twitter, but someone like tweeted it, and then it went all the way up to like CNN, and then it was just like, if you looked on CNN homepage, it was like Obama's speech, and then it was like my video of this like Egyptian woman, you know. So it was like, oh, like things I can do even though I'm like in this little basement making like art, political art, is like can still like make a difference, you know. So yeah, all these like little things along the way. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, the images that you bring into your compositions are graphically bold, and then you also bring all these little important details into it as well. So this is kind of like first sort of experience, this sort of first reading, where it's like taking in sort of the totality of the image, and then your eye kind of moves to all of these small details, which seem to reveal that there's quite an intense research process that you go through. So could you tell, you know, me a little bit about the research process that you undertake when you're approaching a new work?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel like a lot of artists that do sort of like public artwork really lack the research. In my experience working so much with like public artwork and stuff, I feel like because murals are kind of more accepted now, and companies and organizations and neighborhoods really want them, I feel like oftentimes what I'm seeing now is, you know, big mural festivals where oftentimes people are flown in, oftentimes they're men, oftentimes they're white, and they paint like their triangles and they're like flowers and pizza murals, and then they like leave, you know. And so then what the artwork kind of ends up becoming is something that the community that lives there kind of no longer recognizes, you know. So further like kind of adding to gentrification and things like that. And so in my practice, I try to like actively combat that. I would say that you know, so for example, if a small town is going to bring me there to do a mural, then I would say is a big, like most of it is like a research project. You know, I have to look at who lives there, what are the racial demographics of the people that live there, socioeconomic statuses. Is it a liberal little town? Is it a conservative town? What are there organizations there that are already doing really good work that I want to support? You know, are there histories there that the world doesn't necessarily know about that need to be highlighted? That sort of thing. So I'm really, yeah, it does become sort of like this bigger sort of research project. And then, so either that, or if I go somewhere, it's kind of like, is there something that's happening right now in the nation that needs to be addressed? That no matter where I am, people will understand what I'm talking about, and will either have a positive or negative response to it, you know. So back in 2016, when Trump was elected, I went on a street art tour with a friend of mine through a bunch of different cities, and we just put up different wheat paste addressing white supremacy and whiteness, because we felt like this was the time, you know. And at the time, I know it sounds like, I feel like now it's like everyone's talking about that, but I feel like 4 years ago, to put the words white supremacy in the public was like, this is crazy, you better watch out, you know. So yeah, that's
wow. Yeah, and so I feel like you actively sort of disrupt the status quo while making connections with sort of those whose voices are often suppressed or, you know, marginalized, and walking around here in Montreal, where we see, you know, we come across these. I remember the first time I saw one of your murals, I was like, I can't believe this is here. You know, I was just like so emotionally felt, you know, and that's those kinds of experiences with art that we, you know, that we can only hope to have, you know, a few times, you know, in our lives. So it's a really amazing body of work that you've been doing within a kind of methodology that is really engaged, but also leaves a lot of space for poetry.
Oh, thank you. That's very poetic to say that.
Well, that's I guess the power too of scale, you know, and the micro and the macro. My third question is about, you know, the fact that you, in your work, you uplift women, people of color, differently abled, queer and trans folks, immigrant and indigenous people, and you make work that's so vital to affirming their stories and calling attention, right, to the systems that are in place to perpetuate oppression. And I just sort of said, you know, you challenge the status quo. Given that disruption, given that challenge, how do you get these projects off the ground? How do they happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that challenging the status quo is not easy. I've definitely, I feel like, had to have grown a backbone over the last several years to be able to defend myself and also what I know is like just and right. I've done everything from kind of like sweet talking the liquor store owner into like let me do the side of his wall to like the highest, you know, kind of government state entity wants me to do, you know, some project, right? So every level of bureaucratic or non or like high levels of money involved or like not much money involved, you know. And I often find that the more money that's involved and like the higher kind of commissions that both of us and myself have come to have is that people want more of a say when it gets up there, you know. So my favorite ones are kind of like the ones where it's like, you know, and those that's why like my Montreal murals are very near and dear to my heart, because Camille, the leader of Unseated Voices, said like, here's your wall, do exactly as you want, you know, which is like, oh my God, that's like so rare here at least. And so what was I gonna say? Yeah, and so I find often that when I am in these like high places that there's a lot of money on the table, I'm often fighting. I'm often, you know, people are saying like, oh, we're totally down for, you know, the messaging, we're totally down for, you know, we want to be on the right side of history. But when it really comes down to people's politics, I feel like sometimes people's like liberalism only goes to a certain, you know, they hit a ceiling, and I've just found that a lot. So like, for example, Shanna and I did a commission last year, and it was our biggest commission of our lives, like times 5 in terms of money, you know, like, whoa, okay, like this is, you know, amazing. And it just turned into like, oh, you think you're going to paint those 4 people? You're actually going to paint these 4 people. And if you don't, then we're going to give it to somebody else, kind of thing, you know? And it turned into the kind of thing where it's like, well, because it was the 2 of us, we were able to sort of still put in these kind of like subliminal political messaging within the piece. Like we were still able to talk about, so the mural was about like healthcare, you know, and nurses. And we were able to insert, you know, like healthcare for all, like trans rights. We put Black Lives Matter in there. We were talking about deportation and ICE and education, you know, like slipping in all these like little things, when I think if it was just another Joe Schmo artist, he would have just been like, here's the 4 people that you want, and that's it, you know? So I feel like as artists is our responsibility to like, when we're in these, like when we have like a seat at the table, you know, that to really, it's exhausting. Like I'm always tired, but like it is our job to really like push, you know, and yeah, just be on the right side, you know, be on the right side of history, really. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's really courageous, you know, to decide to become, you know, to pursue an artistic path, you know, and then to also decide that you're going to reappropriate public space for voices, and that you have found strategies of opacity and transparency is incredible, and worth a lot more discussion for sure. Yeah, super interesting. So Shanna, I've got some questions for you too. Okay, so your work is informed by your positionality. It's sort of very clear in your artistic statement, as a Tanzanian-American biracial bilingual woman, and I think your engagement with kinship and diasporic consciousness resonates so beautifully in your work. Was that always clear for you from the start, that you were sort of operating, in this multiplicitous way? And if so, like, how did you come to assert that positionality and to allow it to become channeled through your work as an artist?
Well, I think it always has been a part of me. I think it's shifted and changed over time, in terms of like what I draw from, and what I'm interested in. So as you said, I'm half Tanzanian, half American. I was born in the US, but my family moved back to Tanzania when I was really young. I hadn't turned 2 yet. And so I grew up in Tanzania, but then I moved to the US, and that's where I went to art school. And then I moved back to Tanzania, where I was teaching art for a while and also practicing art. And then I moved to Canada. So I've always been very aware of being like of different places. And I think in my earlier work, I was really searching for rootedness. When I was in art school, and like right after art school, like that seemed like a really big part of like I was very, consumed by this idea of like feeling like I wasn't rooted. And it was like a longing for and a grasping towards sensing that I have to be rooted somewhere, And I think over time, my work has really evolved in that I'm no longer interested in that, because being of the diaspora, I've really sort of embraced the fact that I am not rooted in one specific place, in one specific geographic location or culture or, language or socio-political context. Like all these things come into play at once. And when I'm working in one specific place, I'm drawing from another place, and all of this informs who I am. And I think that kind of having that openness is very freeing, for one, because I'm not like longing for anything to be like this idea of belonging to one specific thing, is no longer. So I'm not really interested in that, and I think that beauty and magic comes from that place, of like when I create. There's also very difficult things to have to grapple with within there, but that I feel like there's a boundlessness of the diaspora in terms of the multiplicities and the complexities of what it means to be of the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really feel that, the default in your work is always joy. It's like it's a kind of, it's another sort of positionality which allows you to transcend, these kind of binaries around, are you more this or that? Do you identify more American or Tanzanian? And being able to, get beyond these kind of, sort of push and pull and choices is definitely, I see that in how you collapse time. I think when we first met and I was looking at your work, it's like a lot of these, you see sort of through time, like you see, through the eyes of of your sitters, sort of through that transcend generations. So, even in Eliza, who's, sort of a little girl, you can kind of see you and, your grandmother and all these other women that have come before. And then it could be, a portrait from the mid 20th century, but then, there are little clues and you sort of see like her blue plastic slippers or whatever, and you're like, yeah, that's so contemporary, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I love that kind of collapsing. You know, I think that is a really freeing place to work from. You also have a really strong methodology, which you know, consists of reclaimed wood, photo transfer process, painting patterns, the wood burning and carving. And I was wondering if you could talk about how this confluence of techniques came together for you.
Yeah. So I started working on wood in art school, actually, because in a lot of my painting classes, everybody was using canvas. And I started using canvas, and I just found it to be a very intimidating place to start. Like having this white surface and like nothing on it. It was just, I really struggled with that. And so I started working on wood panels instead, just because it felt like there was something already there. There was something that I found like very beautiful about wood grain and like the pattern. So that's where it started. And I think over time, my connection to it and my kind of fascination with it has just evolved. And that's kind of my primary medium, like the surface that I work on right now. I think wood is a very magical material. It's like heavy, but it floats on water. You can burn it, you can sculpt it, you can carve it. You know, trees tell a story of their environment in the, you know, in the rings. So there's so many fascinating things that I find about wood that's kind of why I picked that materials to use and continue to do it. And then, as you said, with the photo transfer, I was really drawn to photo transfer on wood because of the way the images look like they're printed inside the wood, you know. And as you said, like that timelessness aspect of it too, I think I really love that about the photo transfer process, is that you don't really exactly know when this image was taken. And then just the other, you know, techniques that I use, wood burning, wood carving, those are techniques that I have drawn from Tanzania. When back home, you know, a lot of artists and craftspeople use those techniques. So I kind of borrowed them and used them in my work as well. And I'm just always fascinated and interested in incorporating new ways of working. I rarely stick with one specific way of working over a long period of time. And I think even like with our collaborations, I'm so excited by finding new techniques to, you know, include in our projects, and finding new processes. So that kind of keeps me going and keeps me interested and engaged in what I'm doing. So that's why I'm like always kind of bringing in new techniques into my work.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you know, when you bring something in, it'll intermingle with some of the other approaches that you work with, and maybe, you know, some you know, for depending on a project would be useful to perhaps not use this time, but then incorporate another time. Yeah, so you've got a really wide vocabulary to work with, which is something quite exciting. And it's interesting what you say about the use of wood, and that and reclaimed wood specifically. I was sort of giving a tour the other day with some friends of mine, and describing to them, because they had a lot of questions about the wood. And I said, from what I recall, you know, you'll pick up wood off the street and go like, oh yeah, this is a good piece, and just take it home with you, right?
Right.
Exactly. And yeah, and so that history, you know, whether that piece of wood was part of furniture or whether it was off, you know, some siding of a home, whatever, they carry with it traces, right? Traces of their former lives, which is something that an artist like Barty Kerr, who's also in the show, is also really in tune with. So I find that really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I think there's also an aspect of that, of the taking parts of the city and putting like either it's like my story or the stories of the images and stories of people that feel very important to me, that are often maybe not told or seen. And so I like that idea of like taking something from the city and putting and kind of making the people a part of that too, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but
absolutely. Yeah.
It's like imprinting these stories on a city through the materials that were once used to build it, you know?
The two works in the show, Beekeeper and Eliza, they both feature members of your family as part of the Memory Keepers series. So how do you approach working with your family? I work with my family a lot too. They're like, again, you know, but do they have a sense of the depth of their contribution, you know, to your work, which allows you to maintain the telling of their stories and kind of galvanizing these stories so that they are sort of kept, you know, and continue to radiate?
The way I would say the main way that I work with them is really like listening. You know, it's asking them to tell me a story or sing me a song. With my grandmother, it would be like a lot of the songs that she'll sing is in Kinyaturu, so the song needs to be translated in Kiswahili, or the story needs to be told in Kiswahili, even though it's the story itself is like in Kinyaturu. My mom sometimes helps me with it as well. And yeah, so it's just like listening and engaging through the listening process. And that's like the oral tradition is our way of retelling of important people and historical events. And so kind of, yeah, just like engaging in the oral tradition. I guess, you know, regarding your question about whether they recognize the impact of my work, I guess that's kind of what you said. I don't know about that. And I think the main way that I kind of understand it all is that I am with them in the creation of my work. You know, it's like a way to be with them when I am not with them. And it's also a way to honor the stories that have been told to me. And it's also a way to carry on that legacy, even though that it's not in the oral tradition. It's like in the way that I know how. The best way that I can carry forth that tradition is through the visual medium, you know? So it's like, I guess the way that I view it is more of like, I am carrying on a legacy that has been given to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, you know, it's sort of a question that I, you know, ask anyone who's sort of engaged with music, with, I guess, drawing on their family and their family histories on a regular basis. It's, you know, because there is a sense of great indebtedness to their sharing of that and being open to it, and you know, kind of allowing you to share it with the world, kind of thing. So
I mean, there's also kind of an interesting aspect to it too. So in Swahili, when the way in which stories are told, it's often you'll have like many people gather, and there's this way that a story is opened. So you'll have the main storyteller will say hadithi hadithi, which like announces the story, and then the listeners will say adithinjo wongonjo tamkolea, which means let the story come, let the embellishments be great so that the story might be sweet. And so what's interesting about a lot of the stories is that they're not always exact. The basis of the story is the same, but sometimes people add a little here and there, you know, to kind of embellish the story. And it's a way to make it like the story juicy, or, you know, recounting people, and different people will have a different take on it, basically. And I like the idea of that within the way that I also work, you know, in that, you know, for example, memory keepers of my ancestors, like there's no photograph of her, you know, and so I had to use embellishments to retell that story visually, you know, and so in a way I'm still drawing from the way in which we tell stories, but I'm translating it into a visual medium in the way that the embellishments also are a part of it.
Right. Because the embellishments, sort of the little bits of pattern here and there, the you know, sort of you give us like little clues, you know, as to, you know, the richness of the story. Yeah. It feels like, okay, this is a pivot question. We're going to sort of move towards transition towards the collaborative work that you made for the exhibition, which is called We Are Bridges. And I was wondering if remembering a sister project was at all a predecessor to this collaborative work, if there were some relations there or not, or is this like for you as collaborators, if it was a kind of new next set, or I don't know, departure in some ways from what you've done together before?
Well, Remembering a Sister project is a collaboration I did with my sister. And so we did that in collaboration together. And I won't speak too much about the body of work itself. But it was really interesting when you asked that question, because there is a link in that the work itself, the body of work is about healing, and it's about spirituality, and it's about coming together as family and as community to heal. And it was, my sister was the one who basically called to me to do this project with her after she experienced a really, a very, very, very difficult time. And so it was like we were creating together as a family, but she was taking me, in a sense, on her healing journey. And we were creating this together as a kind of closure to that journey. And my sister is, her spiritual community is an Ifa community, who the elders are the three women depicted in We Are the Bridges. And so we asked them to help guide us in the spiritual aspects of how we would approach the work. And I have to say that I'm not an Ifa practitioner myself, but my sister has been an Ifa practitioner for over like 20 years, and she's always been spiritual from when we were very young. And so they were the guides of this. We turned to them for guiding us on how to approach the work in a way that was respectful, and a way that was kind of honoring the tradition properly, you know. And so that's how they kind of are tied to this project in a way too. Okay. So you picked up on something that I was just like, whoa, that was pretty incredible, that you were sensing something there, even though it wasn't, I wouldn't say that this was a predecessor to the work that we did together.
Okay, yeah. Okay, wow. Well, let's talk about We Are Bridges then. It's a monumental work in so many ways, and I was so moved, you know, when I finally got to see it installed. And it was, I think, the day before we opened, or even the morning, you know, that we were doing the press tour. And the way that you enter the room is that you enter the room by the same wall that the work is on. So you don't see it, you know, as you come in. You enter the room, you go down a couple of steps, and then you turn around, and then you see the work. And so you can imagine, with that sort of way of experiencing it, that the impact was, I mean, I just kind of collapsed and sat on, you know, the little ledge, and, you know, with tears in my eyes. It was just incredibly moving. And I can appreciate the complexity of such a creation at the best of times. And that you managed to bring it into being during a pandemic, which entailed so many complicated logistics, and not to mention emotional strain. So let's talk about, you know, the research, you know, the process. We'll talk about the sitters and all the other, you know, issues. But yeah, let's first start about what brought you, like, the impetus, the genesis of this particular work.
Yeah. There's a picture of Shanna and I about 3 years ago when we were first getting together, and we're sitting in her sister's in-law, and there's like index cards all over the wall that say this woman's work, and we start listing this woman's work, and then we list all the places we want to travel with this woman's work, and we're just like kind of dreaming, just kind of like falling in love, and like, let's, like, you know, how do we work together? What are the ways? And at the time, I was living with my parents, and I just remember, you know, experiencing your family as an adult is like a whole crazy situation. And you're kind of realizing like, oh my God, I'm this way because this is how you treat mom, or you know, you just start picking up on so many other things that it's just like, I needed a lot of therapy after that, you know? But I just started noticing ways in which my mom and I would like kind of, there was so much on our plate in comparison to my dad and my brother, simply because of, you know, being women. So for example, my mom would call me and be like, your brother is like speaking to your dad a certain way, and his son is like picking up on that, and like, what are we gonna do about you? What are you and I gonna do about these men? You know, like things like that just started to really just eat at me, you know? And then even in Shanna and I being together as like a queer biracial couple, like people I feel like don't want to see us together. You know, it is a lot of work to be together because the world is not designed for that. You know, like the Black community doesn't want to see us together. The Latino community is filled with anti-Blackness. You know, all these things, right? So, you know, Sean and I were just in conversation at the time, and we came up with this concept of women's work. Okay, on the surface, it's, you know, cleaning, cooking, ironing, but what is it that's not being named that we also have to do that's like exhausting? So for example, keeping secrets, uplifting one another, self-preserving, you know, kind of being the backbone in like movement work and social justice work, not getting recognition, just all these things. We started to list it out. And so, yeah, so we wanted to create kind of this like visual language around, you know, a different series of depicting those different women's works. So this was like number 3 in that series. Yeah. And we listed like different couples or individuals that we wanted to photograph. So these 3 were next on our list.
Right. So we basically are creating a body of work called This Woman's Work, and this is one of this is within that body of work. And so we were kind of turning to our immediate circle, you could say, the folks around us that we know, that we are so inspired by, that we feel are doing like really profound work that's maybe not really seen or really acknowledged. So the 3 women for me, like, just became immediate, like, we have to do something about them because of the profound work that they do. So just to give you a little bit of like context, they're 3 queer women. They recently became the main guardians of 7-year-old twins. They're elders as well. One of them already has like a grown child. And so the mother of the twins is the godmother of one of the women, Arnita. And she is she's unable to care for the children. And so rather than have the children be put into the child protective system, they are now the main guardian. So they're rearing these 2 very young children, like together as a family, you know? So thinking about just like a new way to be a family is already like very hard and very, like it's not your like conventional family, you know? So even existing together as a family, like the things that they have to confront daily is like women's work. And in addition to that, they are the elders of a spiritual community. As I said earlier, they have created their own kind of community of women of color and queer women of color. And so when we were talking to them about how that came to be, they were really describing to us how, so IFA originates from West Africa and is now practiced throughout the diaspora, the African diaspora in like different ways. Brazil, Cuba, you know, now like the United States as well. And it was brought, the spiritual practice was brought with enslaved people through the transatlantic slave trade. So, I'm like, sorry, I'm getting a little, that was like a little side thing. So yeah, in a lot of places, the tradition was masked through Christianity because enslaved people were not allowed to practice their spiritual traditions. And so it was masked through Christianity, and for example, using saints as to, like, instead of calling their deities, they would use the name of like a saint to be able to kind of show that they were being like good Christians, but really what they were doing is like calling upon their own spiritual, I guess you could say, deities. Mm-hmm. So, but Ifa, as it's practiced in many places, like many other like just religions and like spiritual practices, is embedded with patriarchy and like homophobia, you know? And so they were talking to us about how it was really difficult in some spaces to be out, you know, and as queer women. And for Xochitl, who's a priestess within, she's an Ifa priestess, like in some lineages of Ifa, you're not allowed to be, a woman is not allowed to hold that position.
So she's the middle one in the painting.
So her being questioned, or her position within that tradition not being validated or not even at all being acknowledged, was really, really difficult. And so what they decided to do then is to bring, kind of create their own community where queer women and just women of color could come as their full selves and be able to practice as their full selves. And so when we're just thinking about like this woman's work, and how these three women have had to like find new ways to care for themselves and care for those around them, in a way that is just like really awe-inspiring. And so that's why we chose like the three of them as like one of the pieces for this woman's work. Yeah, and I think I'm just thinking right now about the title of the show, you know, relations, diaspora, relations. It just like, there's so much there around like the spiritual practice, around family, around kinship in terms of like your spiritual family. You know, for them, they're raising children that are not their biological children. But they are their relations, you know? So there's a lot there too, like just in terms of the theme of the show, in terms of who they are. Yeah. So that's that. And the objects that they're all holding. So Sauda is holding a portrait of her grandparents, and she was explaining to us how she's done a lot of work around genealogy, and she's really, really interested in finding her ancestry, because growing up she didn't know very much about her grandparents and great grandparents. So before, what are the tests called?
Oh, Ancestry DNA.
You know, the Ancestry DNA, where you can like find your ancestry. Like she was like, years before that like really became a thing, she's been really doing a lot of just work and like trying to find archives of her family and so on. And for her, she's like, I feel like I'm the bridge between like my ancestors and my nieces and nephews, who I can like give them this knowledge of where we come from, you know? So that's why she chose that portrait to hold when we asked them to hold something that was either sacred to them or felt very important to them. Mm-hmm. And so she's holding a gourd that's used in ceremony, and Arnita's holding a fan that is also sacred to Oshun, one of the deities in Ifa. So yeah, that's a little bit about them.
Yes, you really do without these. I mean, you can sort of infer their status as elders, you know, through just the composed and self-possessed look, you know, that they each have. It really speaks volumes, you know, about the place that they have in the community, and how they are so instrumental and important to the spiritual life of the community. But I was also wondering about, you know, of the details, you know, that are placed on their bodies, these sort of historic moments of protest or of, you know, making claims. And if you could speak to how you made decisions around which of these details to use and why.
Right. So those are all photo transferred, and I wanted to kind of show the legacy of women's work, you know, and some of the things that we had talked about as well, like just the movement work, when, you know, so for example, I have like images of women in the Black Panther Party who were often running like the free food programs for children, or the food programs like across the board. You had them like running like health clinics and so on. So a lot of the key, how can I say, like the famous figures are like men in the Black Panther Party that we know of, but there was a lot of work that was being done to like sustain the party and the movement that was like women's work. And so that, for example, that is one like something that I included in the background. And then other like movements like the women of the Zapatista, there was a lot of activists I included, like the Kenyan activist Wangari Maathai, who was a political and environmental activist, Dolores Huerta, am I saying her name right? Who was, she's still alive, but she was doing a lot of work around farmers and workers' rights. So I can like go on, the list goes on and on. Claudia Jones, who is a communist journalist, who was like writing about intersectionality and like being very active as a journalist long before it was like the 30s and through to the 60s, but long before intersectionality as a term was coined. So I was kind of drawing on different women and different movements that women were really sort of at the forefront, and just like protests, like who's on the front lines, who's like doing the labor and the hard work that's often not recognized. Arnita is a beekeeper. She's the one who's holding the fan. And so I put bees in her headscarf, and there's a bee on her hand as well. But bees are also sacred to Oshun as well. So there's that like link. And I also have a very strong attachment to bees because of beekeeping in my lineage and so on. So there was a lot of intention and a lot of thought around the placement and also like the images that I chose. And I could go on and on and on about it, but I don't think we have the time for all that.
Oh my
but
gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, again, you know, we could have like a module within, you know, an amazing course within women's studies meets art history to like unpack the image, you know, because there's so much going on there. And yeah, and maybe it needs to be done. Maybe by way of, I guess, sort of concluding in this iteration anyway, a discussion on the work is to, you know, have a little bit of insight into what you had to go through to put this work together at this time, because you were in California actually because you found someone you could work with to help fabricate the work, right? Who had, you know, sort of a more robust set of tools and machinery, right? And were you there, like how long were you there and engaged with the making of the work before lockdown happened?
So we took the pictures in February in anticipation of the project. We signed a lease for our place, otherwise I might be with my parents right now, March 1st, and then March like 12th was lockdown, you know? So it was like, okay, we're gonna do what we can within the house. We live in a studio, you know, so it's like, we're gonna do what we can within the house for the project. We don't really know what's going on with the show. We're just gonna like do what we can, you know? So what that involved was like not really being able to go to the studio. With my stencils being so large, I normally get them laser cut, you know. Now I'm like, I've cut enough stencils in my life where it's like, send it out, you know, have a machine do it. And then Shanna with her photo transfer is able to like do, we use a large format printer to do like large photo transfers, right? And so we didn't have access to any of those things. So what that meant was,
so art store.
Also, the art store was closed. Couldn't get nothing, no spray paint, no like respirators even for spray paint. I mean, just like everything was, there was an obstacle, you know. Even the woodworker that we normally work with to, you know, put everything together and all of that. So what that meant was just like really adjusting and going back to like how we did things a long time ago. So for example, like I was cutting everything was like cut by hand, just on the painting itself, you know, as opposed to like getting it laser cut. And then Shanna's, you know, she didn't do like, here's, you know, Sochi's leg is all photo transferred at once. It was just like individually done with our printer that we had at home, which was 8.5 by 11, you know? So, and then just really adapting, you know. At first it was just the three of them and we were kind of okay with that. And Shanna was like, do a background, Jess, do a background. I was like, I don't want to do a background. Like, it's too much. And then it was like, okay, we're going to do a background. So then it's like figuring out there's maybe one store that we can go to that can print out like these stencils and then cutting it out. I mean, it was just like, yeah, every step of the way was like a challenge. But in the end, like, I'm so proud of this piece. Like it might not have been done otherwise, and it might not have been so like prolific otherwise, you know, and it means so much. And also at the same time, like Oakland is like the center of all things political. So it was like the uprising, you know, when on TV and in like little Instagram videos, when you're seeing like the looting happening and like all this stuff, it's like it was happening here, you know. So we would be at the studio and then it was like, we can't stay here past sundown because we know when it's sundown, like things are going to go down, you know, in the neighborhood.
But also there was a lockdown, or not a lockdown, there was a curfew at one point where nobody was allowed to be outside at a certain point. I mean, the police response to the protests were so intense. And even that itself, it's like how to continue like our focus when so much was going on around us. And also for me, like I'm the type of person who wants to be out, if I can be out in a safe way, to participate in this. Like this was it was really important for us, you know. So it's like, how do we go to protests? So we ended up going to a few where it was like in, you know, car caravans. I mean, Oakland is really incredible and just has this like long legacy of like just like protests, like even the Black Panther Party and so on. So just to be like in it just felt important too. But it was also hard to stay focused is the point. And just like an emotional roller coaster through all of it, you know. Awful things were happening here. At one point, there were nooses that were found like by the lake near where we live, like hanging from trees. It's just like every day was just like so intense, you know.
But the work was also there to, I would say, ground us. It was nice to have like something to just like, even though the world was on fire around us, to come back to this and like to come back to our purpose as to why we're doing this, you know. So, you know, we weren't able to go to the opening, but what we wanted to let you know that we had the three women the day before it was shipped out. So it was like, we finished the final raise, sealing it. And then the next day we had the women come and they all were like, they all lost it, you know, they all lost it. And it was just, Sean and I were in shock because we had just finished it. We were kind of blacked out, not able to process, you know, when you just finish something, you just birthed something, you know. And at the end of the day, it was like, they felt seen, you know. They felt like, oh, you know what, like the people depicted themselves are worthy of this, of being like at a big foundation, you know, on display, and they like lost it, you know. So it was kind of like, that's the point, like, we see you and thank you for what you do, you know. But it all comes back to work. It always comes back to the women's work, because it's like, you know, assumed, oh, they're the women, they're going to rear the kids, of course, like, you know, but they don't want to do that, you know. They're older and they want to just chill and like get on with their lives. And, you know, it takes like two queer women of color to be like, we see you, other women of color, you know, like, we see you and thank you for your like your service to us and like being the bridge for us, you know. So
that was very powerful. It was really powerful.
It's a wonderful example of the circulation of gift. You know, you've given them a gift, and you know, that kind of level of feeling felt is again something that you'll never. It's not just that you'll never forget, but you'll always treasure, because it isn't something that happens all the time, and it happens, you know, for people like me who see these murals here in Montreal. This sort of, you know, degree of feeling felt. It's not sort of surprising to me that, you know, this work and Shanna's work were always on the cover images, or like the major image for the newspaper reviews, which were all incredible. So congratulations, you know, on making such a powerful work under ridiculous and intense conditions. I can't thank you enough, from the bottom of my heart, for persevering.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
It's
yeah, it's pretty incredible to be a part of this. Even given the context, it really does mean a lot. So thank you for the invitation.
If it wasn't you, I mean, it might not be us here. So, you know, it's also important that you're there doing that work. So, you know.
Well, I'm happy to be part of the gift circle whenever possible. Well, I again, this has been wonderful. Thank you for spending time, you know, with us this way. You know, we look forward to sharing this with folks so that they get this in-depth view of the work on display, but also a little bird's eye into your practices. You know, and I wish you all the best with with the continuation, and you know that. You make the best of it, as you have been doing, you know, all this time, really in the kind of the eye of the storm.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
We have champagne because we never got to do it in person. So we'll pop this after.
I don't know if you remember, but you wrote in an email at one point that, like, when it's all done, we'll celebrate with champagne. So we're like, we have our bottle.
Okay, well, all right. You know, hopefully we can see each other in 3D in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Until and then just, you know, stay well, be well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.